Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Local Infrastructure Hub webinar, A Smart Approach to Road Innovation. The Local Infrastructure Hub is a partnership between the United States Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and Results for America. I'm Tom Cochran, the CEO of the United States Conference of Mayors, coming to you from the headquarters in Washington, D.C. Our session today is co-hosted by the Conference and Results for America, and is supported by our funders, Greenberg Philanthropists, the Ballmer Group, Emerson Collective, the Ford Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. It bears repeating that we are here because of the incredible programs enacted in the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law, which we all work so hard to make it a reality. Of course, none of this will be possible without the incredible leadership of President Biden and our partnership that we have with this administration. Today, we'll hear from the Department of Transportation officials on their exciting SMART Grants program. We also have some outstanding mayors who will talk about their SMART projects and how they develop successful funding proposals. Their cities are using technology and new approaches to revolutionize transportation in their communities. We'll hear from Fort Collins Mayor Jeni Arndt and Louisville Mayor Greenberg. We thank you for joining us today. Now, please welcome Michelle Jolin from RFA, who will serve as today's MC. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. And good afternoon. My name is Michelle Jolin. I'm the CEO and co-founder for Results for America. I want to thank you for joining today's Local Infrastructure Hub session. As Tom said, today we're going to hear from federal agency officials and leaders about projects that SMART funding can be used for, strategies for competitive applications, and importantly, upcoming deadlines and no-fault provisions and a number of other things to make sure that the process for applying for these grants is efficient and straightforward. So first, I'm pleased to welcome Ben Levine, who's a senior advisor for research and technology at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and the Zoom is yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Michelle and Tom, and thank you to all the organizations involved in the Local Infrastructure Hub. I think it's a critical resource to bring cities and communities together and to ensure that we're all making the most of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And it's evident by the wonderful set of mayors that you have joining this program. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Mayor Arndt and Mayor Greenberg and hear a bit more about their perspectives on the SMART projects that they're working on the ground. I'm going to cover as much as I'm going to kind of use this time to cover SMART grants. We don't have so much time, so I'll direct you to some resources that I think can dive a little deeper. But maybe first some context. So SMART is the largest federal investment in transportation technology to date. And we really view it as an opportunity to inform and to shape activities across our country's transportation system, meaning that we hope approaches that are demonstrated and popularized in SMART will find their ways into other competitive grant programs, into formula funding, into new and growing commercial products and markets and new ways of doing business in our transportation system. And I think for that reason, it's really a key piece of the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law and everything that law will achieve. But I think, so drilling back down, maybe the most important message for everyone on this call is that the SMART Grants Notice of Funding opportunity is live. It's due October 10th at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and you still have time to start or to refine a project in time for that deadline. And so we have a full set of detailed materials about the program. We can go to the previous slide here. We have a full set of detailed materials about the program, FAQs, pre-recorded longer webinars. So we did like an hour-long webinar that's posted, and we have other materials on our website. We have illustrative use cases for concepts that align to the SMART Grants program. And the URLs to that website will be shared at the end of this presentation, and we can also drop them in the chat if we're able. Because there's all these other materials, I think you'll have to excuse my brevity. I'll try to cover some kind of top line themes and concepts that would be relevant as you explore the SMART Grants program. So overall, SMART Grants is a program that explicitly funds demonstration projects, and it is funded with $100 million annually over the course of 5 years. We have 4 years of funding left, and the projects support smart city and technology demonstrations undertaken by state, local, and tribal governments. instrumentalities of those governments. Some examples are listed here on the slide, but you can consult the NOFO for more detailed categories. We can go to the next slide here. So just some kind of values that we think about in the context of smart grants. So I talked about demonstration projects, this idea of bringing new ideas to our transportation systems, showing things that I think about this group and sort of the focus of what works and how can we scale and learn from what works. And so using demonstration projects to really show new concepts that are possible and can ultimately be translated to other communities and extended in local communities in the transportation system. We're also very focused on addressing real world challenges. And so we're very conscious of the risk of sort of having technology seeking solutions or seeking problems, and instead thinking about things the other way, where we really root technology in the problems that a local transportation system has. And we really think about that as this idea of purpose-driven innovation, really rooting things in a problem that a community faces in its transportation system, or a problem that a local transportation agency has having trouble addressing, and how can we use something like smart grants to activate solutions for that program. And then finally, how do we use a program like this to build technical and technology capacity in agencies and also in sort of adjacent organizations in communities? We recognize that our transportation agencies are not necessarily staffed to be on the leading edge of technology in every aspect of their work. And so we view this program as a bridge to sort of build out some of the technical capacity that's needed to really undertake these projects, and hope that programs like this can have spillover benefits on the way that workforce and communities think about the problems and how they approach technical solutions to them. We can go to the next slide here. So overall, Smart Grants is a two-stage program. The design of that two-stage program is really to ensure that projects can be brought along in their journey from initial sort of planning and prototyping into implementation. And the stage one planning and prototyping grants are what we funded last year. The NOFO that's available and open right now that closes on October 10th is only for stage one planning and prototyping grants. Those grants are $250,000 to $2 million in funding and cover a project period of about 18 months. The stage one winners will have an opportunity in subsequent years to apply for stage two grants, and those will be up to $15 million over 36 months. The rationale for the structure is that we recognize projects are not ready for full-scale implementation on day one. And so how do we build out the capacity, the partnerships, the demonstration of what works, what doesn't work, and use stage one in order to refine those ideas and then bring those ideas into a stage two grant making process and fund projects that really are poised to have impact across their communities. And then how do we take what happens from stage two and inform the rest of the transportation system? How do we capture the lessons learned? How do we create artifacts that can live with the transportation kind of ecosystem and really captures the learnings from that process? And then I also talked about this idea that SMART in some ways is the tip of the spear of innovation in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And there's this opportunity to take the findings from SMART and extend elsewhere. And so while this program is a stage two program, we view there really to be a period beyond stage two, which is how do you incorporate your work into existing transportation plans in your community or your city? How do you tap formula funds? How do you think about sustainable business models that are embedded in the demonstration that you're presenting? We can go to the next slide here. So there are 8 technology areas that are in the Smart Grant statute, and you'll see that they're a diverse set of topics, which I'm sure are very relevant for your communities. Talking about smart grid and achieving critical climate priorities, commerce delivery and logistics. We'll probably talk a little bit about the investments we made in curb management, connected vehicles and coordinated automation, and the linkage of technology to roadway safety. But then also topics like innovative aviation. How do we think about drones as a tool to do inspection or to potentially deliver goods to far-flung communities? So there's a ton of different kind of concepts that are embedded in these technology areas. And you can get more detail about kind of what the domains are and how they connect in the NOFO. I'll cover a little bit. We can go to the next slide here. Just the portfolio of grants that the applications we saw and that we then funded last year. And so we saw about 400 applications, almost $600 million in requests, representing vast swaths of the country. We ended up funding 59 projects, almost $100 million, representing 2/3 of the states. And so we have a really diverse set of projects. And we can go to the next slide here. You'll see just a map that shows where the projects are located. Some of these projects are statewide, some are localized to communities. There are projects that address the most urban of challenges, say some sort of freight delivery zone in a urban context, some that are addressing challenges specific to rural communities, drone delivery, or mapping infrastructure in very rural parts of the country. And then projects that are thinking about systems level change, in a transit system or a entire state's set of transit systems. So there's a real diversity of projects, and we're really excited to have 2 of these projects highlighted in more detail later in the program through Mayors Arndt and Greenberg. We can go to the next slide here. So I'll just kind of pull on a couple overall themes that we saw from from last year's awards. And I should say up front that these are themes that emerge. These are not the 3 funding buckets that we're looking at. So don't come up with your idea and think, okay, how does it align to one of these 3 areas? This is sort of just descriptive in a way of organizing what we saw. But we really saw projects in safety, managing public space, and transit innovation as kind of some core themes that emerge. There's some projects that are that end up being sort of outside this realm, but I'll just highlight a few examples of what we saw. So safety, we saw projects around connected vehicles, smart traffic signalization systems that really can bring a deeper level of intelligence and awareness of how our roadways are being used and create safer systems. We saw projects that sought to better manage public space. So we funded 9 projects that are doing curb management across its many uses: pickup, drop off, freight, parking. And so there's a set of projects that are really innovating and really taking advantage of, I think, the deepest investment by the federal government in this domain. There's also projects that are using drones for inspection of physical infrastructure assets that are kind of in this domain. And then finally, transit innovation. I think everyone on this call probably knows that that it's a really important time to think about transit's role in our communities. And so we're really excited to fund projects that are doing transit signal priority within traffic signals, that are thinking about transit payments, that are thinking about wayfinding for people with disabilities. You can learn more about these projects if you explore in depth. So, and we can go to the next slide here. A couple of themes that I think emerged from applications and things that we'd highlight for anyone thinking about applying. So one key piece is, how do you align your project to this 2-stage program that we've designed? Good projects were able to articulate what they plan to do during stage 1, and then what their vision is for stage 2. We ask those questions, and I think painting that picture is really important for us as we go through the evaluation process. Purpose-driven innovation. I talked about sort of making sure that technology is solving problems and not searching for problems. And so really articulating what that local problem is, either for your transportation agency or for community, is really important. Transformations, one of our strategic priorities as a department. And so how do we leverage new technologies in new ways? And so SMART is not necessarily a program that allows you to procure the off-the-shelf technology that is deployed everywhere in the country, but instead, how do you pull on things that are commercially available, things that are attainable in the next couple of years, but also in uses that really require a lot of elbow grease and legwork to make sure that that those implementations go right. And so we're looking to this to have a transformational impact on our transportation system, whether we're talking about safety or climate or equity outcomes. And then finally, how do you integrate your project into your community? How do you sort of tell the stories of really how this project will benefit the community? How do you think about addressing underserved communities as part of your project? We'll go to the next slide, and I'll just close here. One more slide, please, with just a couple of highlights, and we can go in more depth on this. And our webinar that I would recommend, if in addition, the number one piece of advice is read the NOFO and perhaps read it multiple times. But if you want to go watch our webinar, I'd recommend that as well, where we really go through these kind of changes from last year's NOFO, and then also talk about some other elements that are worth consideration. If you read last year's NOFO, you'll recognize this year's NOFO. I think similar themes. There are some changes listed here on the left, mostly related to kind of our intake of information and making sure that we understand as much as we can about the projects. And then I talked a little bit about this idea of creating a vision for stage 2. That's really important. Smart Grants is a Justice 40 covered program, and so we're really excited about the opportunity to leverage the program in order to create positive outcomes for communities of all types and ensure that the communities that have been left behind and left out for too long really have access to this program. And we view that as a real core piece to what we're doing. So incredibly excited about that. And then finally, I'll talk about both community engagement and partnership. This is a program where we're trying new things, and it takes a village to do that. And so we kind of expect applications to have really thought through that aspect. And it is a 2-stage program, meaning you can build those things maybe during a stage 1 grant, but we really want to see that enthusiasm and excitement, and you've thought deeply about what it's going to take to implement. So again, I'll remind you, NOFO is open for just under a month now, and so time to really get going on developing responses if you're considering it. And we appreciate everyone's interest. I'm happy to answer some questions here, but thanks again for your time and participation. And here's some links. I think we'll try to provide these if possible in the chat, but here's some links that we'd recommend you check out for more information, and also an email address that you can use for any questions you might have. So thank you.
And thank you. Super helpful. Lots of important information there. Read the NOFO, point number 1. We're now going to open the Zoom for audience questions. And so please come off mute and ask your question for Ben but first put it in the chat, which would be helpful. Before we do that, though, wanted a question from Mayor Greenberg. Or to Mayor Greenberg, and would be helpful, Mayor Greenberg. First of all, thank you for joining us. And we'd like to hear your thoughts on the potential for cities to partner with each other on applications. And how should city leaders be thinking about this option, and what strategies and tactics should they use to forge these partnerships on specific projects?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for including me. I'm extremely excited about this whole initiative, the Smart Grant program, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. If for no other reason, I've been mayor for a whopping 8 months now. And shortly after I got elected, but before I took office, I was driving around the city with my family, and my youngest son said to me that his number one goal for me as mayor was to make sure that all of the traffic lights across the whole city were synchronized. He had just gotten his license at 16, and he was tired of waiting at red lights. And so that's my goal as mayor. And so little did he did not know about this program, but maybe if it's not something that Louisville does, another city will figure that out, how no one ever has to wait at traffic lights anymore, and he will be satisfied. But this is a great program, and we are very fortunate to have been the recipient of a Smart Grant Award for a program in Louisville that really focuses on some of our most dangerous flood-prone underpasses, which is something that we deal with flooding in our city of Louisville. I'm sure other cities deal with that in various ways, shape, or forms in their cities, but we have a unique situation here. And so our grant relates to really focused on sensors and giving warning to the community before they get to 4 different underpasses in our city that will give so that they don't get stuck. We have far too many. We've all seen it on the news before, of the cars that are stuck in the underpasses as a result of some kind of flash flooding event. This program and this implementation will protect that. And so we're really excited about, actually the work starts next week now that we have the award. So we're really excited about getting this going. I'm happy to talk more about it later. But in terms of partnerships, to answer your question, we really found that partnerships were key. Having a lot of partnerships and talking early and often. I know folks have another month or so, that's plenty of time, but also to engage with the community as well. particularly with respect to the Justice 40 goals that you just heard Ben talk about. To me, the partnership with the community is a key part of it. For our grant, 3 of the 4 locations of these flood-prone underpasses were located in Justice 40 areas. They were in DOT climate and economic justice neighborhoods, as well as DOT historically disadvantaged communities. And so that was part of it, is hearing from those communities about how these situations get dangerous and impact them, and how our solution would also help them. And so in terms of the partnerships, I encourage that. I also 2 other things that we found to be very valuable. One was really having a clear and concise use of specific technology. You saw in Ben's slides about some of those key focus areas. Ours, again, was on sensors and how sensors can give early warning for these flood-prone areas and underpasses. And also an idea that scales, an idea that has a lot more applications maybe than just the specific use that you're applying for, or that while in our case, we only got the grant for 4 locations, we know that the implementation, when we prove that this works and we work out all the kinks, has far more benefit across our city and then also for others. And so that's really what I'm most excited about, is seeing how all of the SMART grant recipients across the country, what their technologies and their systems are, that then all of us in other cities can borrow from to improve our infrastructure in our respective cities. So I'm happy to talk more about the specifics of our program, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mayor Greenberg. Super interesting. And Ben, do you want to say a few more things about the potential for cities to partner with each other on applications?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll highlight a couple of things. And Mayor Greenberg, thanks for sharing insights into your project. We're incredibly excited about the problem that you're tackling. And, I think it's a problem that affects so many communities. And I'll talk about this opportunity to think about partnerships in a couple of different layers. Actually, Mayor, we're going to have members of your team and some of the partners come to DC next week. So we're hosting an event next week on Thursday and Friday. Every one of the SMART grantees is coming into our building and sharing what they're doing with each other. So we're going to have 250 people all implementing these projects on the ground who will be working together. And I think that one thing that we really want to think about is how do we leverage all these different communities across the country that are working on these different forms of local experimentation, some of which are very related. There's another city, another grant that's going to be addressing roadway flooding and sensing. And so I think there's a lot to learn as those projects are implemented. But one key priority is, how can we think about this group as a cohort? How do we learn from each other? How do we ensure that we're translating insights that are gleaned from this process? There's also obviously a need to partner with industry, with community groups, with nonprofit organizations, with all the various partners that might be present in a transportation community or solution. And so, we ask questions about that in the NOFO, and we really do like to see teams that have thought about how they approach that issue. Now, that said, we also want to build in time to build out those partnerships over the course of a stage 1 project. We recognize that when someone puts in their NOFO response, that's not what the project is going to look like 2 years from then, and we recognize and embrace that. And so we want projects to grow and thrive and seek out additional support locally. The last thing I'll say is this one unique opportunity, and I see some people on the call here that have been involved in some of these projects, but we also have this concept in SMART grants in the NOFO called a collaborative application. And so there's an opportunity for multiple communities to come in for what we call a collaborative application, which is a set of applications that each have their own funding relationship with USDOT. They each submit their own NOFO response, but they are addressing a common problem. They're leveraging common resources and common partnerships. And we funded eight communities across the country that are doing curb management, that are all being organized in this collaborative application format. And there's actually a 9th curb management project that we hope can learn from that as well and be incorporated into that work. And so the idea of leveraging a federal grant to strengthen the ecosystem around a problem set is something that's very compelling. And I think that, stretches federal resources further, while also forming real communities of practice around problems. And so we're incredibly enthusiastic about that. But I mentioned this summit that we're going to be hosting next week. We also hope that some of those kind of collaborative clusters are built through activities like that event. And we may see more communities sort of form those partnerships, develop independent relationships with each other, and call each other up for insights and feedback. And we'll be making sure people remain accountable and are a part of calls and everything that we need to do to make sure everyone stays organized around this program. Thanks.
Thank you. Very helpful. We have two additional questions coming in on the chat. One, Alejandra Morales. Would you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, so I had a question on if this grant would allow like our city to be able to create an ITS comprehensive plan. We're lacking obviously fiber optics to be able to like synchronize everything, in the future, also by more innovative traffic lights. And I just had that question, does this grant, allow that? That way we have an understanding that we are thinking through correctly or not.
Sure, yeah, happy to answer that. So, and for those who couldn't hear the questions about whether the funding is, the program can be used for developing a intelligent transportation system plan. I think that the answer generally is yes. One thing I'd highlight is that the stage 1 grants support planning and prototyping activities. And so this is a demonstration program, written right there by Congress. And so we do want to make sure that projects are demonstrating the technologies that they're contemplating. And so while planning can certainly be a part of that, I think that we also want to see the demonstration of those technologies. So I could see how an ITS plan might also be linked to a demonstration of some of those component parts. And, we've talked a lot about this 2-stage program, and certainly stage 2 might involve deeper implementation of that work. $15 million. I'm not sure what city or community you represent, but $15 million probably is not going to fully deploy an ITS system across an entire city. And so I think it's important to think about this sort of in a phased approach that really is attacking a specific kind of problem that that you want to solve in your city or community.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And Jessica McElwee, you want to ask your question?
Sure, good afternoon. My question was regarding electric vehicles planning. We're noticing a lot of, disconnect within our transportation system with electric vehicles and trying to make sure we have a connected charging network. So I was wondering if this is something that this particular grant would be able to fund and cover.
Sure, yeah. So one of the 8 technology categories is smart grid. And another category is systems integration, which I think can even speak to some of the other aspects of the problem that you've identified. But yes, there are a number of grants that we made. I think oftentimes we saw proposals come in that were thinking about electrification of public fleets. And so one of the things that we were kind of focused on was how do we, because this program is available to the eligible entities are state, local, and tribal governments, what are the types of electrification problems that they either have on their public fleets, or how do they think about sort of like electrification in the context of their city or community? And so there's more details in the NOFO about sort of how we delineate that, and just to ensure that I think we're focusing the applicants on problems that sort of felt aligned to the scope of the program. There's obviously a lot of federal resources that are going into electrification. And so Smart Grants is a relatively small program to some of those big programs like the NEVI program, which is there's $7.5 billion over 5 years going to vehicle electrification, and more resources, across the federal government attacking different aspects of that problem. So we really were focused on sort of what are some of the unique elements that are needed. And I believe the mayor of Fort Collins might talk about that given the project that they're working on. So there's a number of good examples if you look at the cohort of grantees that we funded last year to get a sense of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thank you for your questions. And thank you again for joining us, Ben. We're now going to turn to Karina Ricks, who's a partner at Cityfi, who will moderate our panel of mayors and provide some perspectives on this grant opportunity. Karina, thank you for being here today. The Zoom is yours.
Attend. So before we get into the mayors, I'll just say that I've had the great privilege of working with one of the collaboratives that Ben mentioned, and there's a lot of lessons learned that we can share from that experience for other cities that are coming in. Some of them are, you know, don't invent a new problem to pursue this SMART grant funding. Really look at some of those initiatives that you already have underway for your city and apply that. Use this opportunity to find new solutions to those old problems. Look at phoning a friend and developing that collaborative kind of notion so that you can build these initiatives together so that you can, as you go toward implementation, it's applying for the grant is really the smallest part. It's really implementing the grant that becomes a bigger challenge. And so making sure that you're really teed up to implement it, to go through the grant award process and execute on those demonstrations. So I want to talk with the mayors. Thank you so much for being here and really sharing more information with the aspiring grantees that are on the call today, and sort of how you thought about those priorities that you have in your community, how you could leverage this SMART grant opportunity to address those longstanding challenges that were there and really approach it in a different way. So maybe Mayor Arndt, if we can start with yours, maybe a little bit about the exciting grant that you received, why this was a challenge that you wanted to tap in here, what is sort of new and different.
Sure, happy to. Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and all the partners that are bringing us together today, and for the SMART grant and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So a lot of gratitude for that. And also shout out to Jessica, who seems like a Fort Collins plant, but really wasn't. You asked the question. That is exactly the grant that we got to address a need for designing a master plan for our EV charging stations for our growing city fleet. So if you'd like, or anyone would like more information on that than I can give during this seminar, please contact Fort Collins. We're more than happy to share, and we're honored to have received over $1 million that started on September 15th. We have 18 months, which is a good challenge for us. And a little bit about collaboration and working together. We couldn't have done this without our partners, and transportation is extremely well positioned as a topic that you absolutely must partner with, right? So I can talk more about partners later if you like me to, but specifically our grant will do 3 things in phase 1 that we've identified, which will provide a standard framework to minimize the financial and operational risk as the city fleets electrify. We were very early adopters in Fort Collins of electric charging stations. In fact, we were in the New York Times years ago, and my brother, who lives in New York and thinks everything happens in New York, he called me and he said, "You have an EV charger." And I said, "I know, I live here." So being really early in on that, we hadn't obviously been able to see completely into the future. And so some of our charging stations we don't have a master plan, let's just put it that way. And as we electrify right now, we have 40 EVs in our fleet. We have an electric Zamboni, an electric street sweeper in addition to it, just to mention, that's kind of fun. But we really needed to understand where to install new chargers, how to coordinate them together. And then of course the charging infrastructure, when we charge them, how we charge them. That's what this grant's going to do for us in one time, or one aspect. The other is to study the feasibility of integrating our charging management into our distributed energy resource management system, which is critical for our public power authority to meet its 100% electrification goals by 2030. So no longer will public power be a one-way street with a wholesaler and a distributor. It's going to be a two-way street. So we're going to need to tell them when we're charging, when we're creating energy. So hopefully that software, and then pilot the management software. So those are the 3 aspects of our grant.
It's amazing. It's a great project, and I'm sure a lot of us will learn so much from it. I think one of the other really interesting aspects of how Fort Collins has approached this is that you were able to leverage other sources of funding also together with the SMART grant. And so again, kind of showing that partnership and just cross-disciplinary connections. Can you talk a little bit about those other funding sources like the EECBG and the IRA tax credits?
You know what? Actually, that would be our energy expert would be better at that, John Phelan, who's on the call, I believe. No, Tracy's on the call, I think. But I do have a list of partners from the private sector to the Colorado Energy Office to our Northern Colorado Clean Cities Initiative to our North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization. And then of course our Platte River Power Authority, which is our publicly owned public power. And then Xcel Energy has been a good partner too. So some of the actual details of the actual funding, we'd have to come in and Tracy can speak, or we could just get you those details if you're interested. But it's always a partnership, has to be.
Yeah, I agree. And that partnership helps to really amplify the reach of the program and magnify it in other communities as well. Maybe we can turn to Mayor Greenberg and talk a little bit more. You shared already the basics of your grant program and what you're working on. This is a SMART grant that was received by the metro government, correct? It was a regional application, but you're a city. So sometimes those relationships can get interesting, speaking as a former city official myself. Can you talk about how that partnership works, the region and the city, and how it's really advancing your city's smart city goals?
Yeah, sure. Well, here in Louisville, we have a unique situation in that we have a city and county merged government. So I am both the mayor of the city of Louisville. The city of Louisville is now Jefferson County. It's one and the same. We have one metro government. Nashville, Indianapolis, some other metropolitan areas around the city have the same merged government. And so that makes it a little bit easier when it comes to transportation planning, because we're looking at the entire county area, not just our one city. And then we do have, like I'm sure others, also regional transportation groups that also look at planning across different parts of our state, but also, like many other cities, we're on the boundaries of a state. So we're just a stone's throw from the state of Indiana across the Ohio River. And so when we look at transportation, it's not just about what's going on in our city or surrounding counties, but it's also about the entire region that includes another state. Our biggest transportation projects that we've ever undertaken as a city or state involved bridges over the Ohio River, and those were involving both states. And so, we're really excited about this, and we did have input from others along the Ohio River. It's not just Louisville, but it's other cities that we work with regularly in surrounding counties that have similar issues. One other thing I'll add is that when we were considering this particular proposal, is we wanted to make sure these were not standalone things, but that rather they had the ability to integrate with other city services and with really the rest of our approach to our transportation system. And so we have a traffic operations center that has been in place since 2018. And so this will feed data into that, but also other agencies. When you talk about, you heard when Mayor was just talking about partnerships, we have a partnership with the Metropolitan Sewer District. Obviously, issues of stormwater and flood protection are very important to our Metropolitan Sewer District. And so they were a key partner in this as well, as we were looking at all of this. And also, I've got just one more quick thing. I've got about 5 minutes left, and then as many mayors are, we're throwing a curveball throughout the day. So I've got to run in about 5 minutes. I apologize in advance.
Great. Well, we'll then toss this one back to you too, though, to answer, which is that part of Justice 40 is not only where the benefits are accruing, but it's also the participation of historically underrepresented or marginalized people in this new technology, and really thinking about how we can have some reparative investments going on. And can you speak a little bit, talking about a curveball maybe, but speak a little bit about how we can engage some of these populations as you go forward to implement the demonstration phase, and then ultimately scale it in line with the Justice 40 objectives?
Yeah, we think this is critically important. And when we're looking at not just applications for the SMART grant, but for other programs as well under the bipartisan infrastructure law, this is critically important to us. And, we do live in a city where over 40% of our community lives in disadvantaged areas under these criteria. But we are really focused on serving these communities because, as I'm sure others on this call have felt, that they've been overlooked. Those areas have been overlooked for far too long. And so one of the things that we did was we actually conducted interviews with community members, with other leaders of nonprofit organizations that are based in these communities and serve these communities, and also some of the other elected officials from our city council, but also that represent, for example, the state reps and senators that represent these communities in other areas of government to get their feedback as well. And so we conducted over 40 interviews prior to submitting this grant. And that was really helpful to us because in addition to what ultimately turned into this grant proposal, we also got very important feedback that is informing some other investment decisions that we're making on the local level and with respect to some of our infrastructure and transportation requests to the state that were really informed by those conversations. And so we are really committed to improving the infrastructure in these areas, and that's going to be a focus of ours. And so this was very helpful. I'd encourage folks to do that if they haven't already, even if it's not applicable to this particular grant program. The feedback that we got was really helpful from residents in particular. They know their neighborhood the best, and it's not just going out for a visit, but when you live with a particular type of infrastructure or aging infrastructure or areas that don't have infrastructure, understanding what the impact on day-to-day life is for the residents is so critically important. And we gained a lot of value that's going to inform decisions for the coming years ahead for us.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, it's true that some of the most valuable conversations happen in line at the grocery store to really understand, right, what people are facing in their day-to-day lives and to really humanize how this technology can affect them. So Mayor, how do you anticipate kind of really including, thank you, Mayor, we understand. How do you anticipate incorporating community input and in particular in the Justice 40 communities?
Sure. Equity inclusion is the lens, which, I truly believe that Fort Collins uses to implement all our city programs. And I think that's probably a really big impetus behind developing a master plan, right? So for the entire community, all the residents, right? So I think that's the whole impetus of the usage of the grant and the master plan, is so that we're thoughtful and intentional about the entire community, not just part of the community or where it's convenient for some people, right? So I would like to think that is one of the main drivers behind the grant. We also have hardwired through our public broadband initiative every single home in Fort Collins, and then we have a big equity push, an income qualified. It's not even application. If you qualify on the income scale, we don't send you less. We do everyone a gig up and a gig down, no matter what you're paying. So that's a huge equity in terms of schooling and access to internet, all the things that we know. And I think the charging and electrification is also through that lens. So it permeates all we do. And I don't think you could really run a very nice or strong community without that, to be blunt. So yeah. It permeates all we do.
Especially as we move toward electrification. That's been a key concern of how do we, do this in an inclusive way.
Absolutely. And then we have to build in resiliency, because we know our most vulnerable communities might be impacted most if we move, and this is a little controversial to say, but if we move too fast and get ahead of ourselves and put ourselves in a vulnerable position in terms of supplying for reliability, I think that's a real threat. And I want to really pay very close attention to that, because it will be our vulnerable communities who will be impacted, and are now, in the future would be too, if we're not really careful and intentional about building the reliability in for everyone, especially them. Yeah.
I want to talk just one more question, then maybe if others have some questions that they'd like to ask you, they can put them in the chat as well. But the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act have really provided a robust amount of funding to communities, right? We've been waiting for this for a long time. Here it is. Much of that has already been awarded and has gone out the door from the various government departments. And now it comes the hard task of putting that money to use and implementing it. The SMART grant program is that cutting edge, pushing the envelope, reaching toward the next generation of technologies, which means that it takes maybe a little bit extra lift than the things that we're really familiar with doing. So can you talk a little bit about how, now I'm sure your staff are busy putting all of this money to use, how are you planning for the actual implementation and deployment and staffing of this, and what advice might you give others as they prepare for that?
Have very excellent strategic plans and then make them flexible, right? Future proof them with being intentional and flexible. But staffing is a challenge. I've always thought, not just absorbing, but utilizing the money to the best and highest uses is going to be a challenge for local governments. And, frankly, we're not immune to some of the staffing challenges that the private and public sector have experienced recently. So I would say a robust strategic planning, and then make sure that you're nimble to meet the goals of your community in the way that serves them best. And keep applying and working. That's why I love the partnerships and that you're bringing everyone in, because I know as mayor, I learned so much from my colleagues from how to best proceed. And then, and I just don't think we can say it enough. We are all in this together. We work locally, but we are connected. And transportation is a really good, as I said earlier, topic to live out those connections, regionalism throughout the state, international and nationally. So I did want to say one more thing about the advantage of one of these grants is that we think then Fort Collins, it will help us. The work that we're doing behind this grant will help us leverage other grants, because it just, as you just mentioned, a lot of that money's already come to the state. So, and maybe not just localities. So we think that it's going to help us with, I can name that, additional grants. We think that we might be able to leverage this one into the next one. So I just wanted to mention that, not, multiplier effect. Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think that's exactly what USDOT and the Department of Energy and other public agencies want to see this be additive. They want to show that cross-pollination between transportation and so many other aspects of life. So that is really something great. And being part of the SMART awardees of the first round and subsequent rounds, it really is a community of learning. I think that's what Ben and his team are really striving to do, so that you can reach out to other awardees, whether it's in the same type of solution that you've been funded for, or if it's something completely different, that you can learn from each other, collaborate with one another, seed those other technology ideas, and really advance innovation in our country.
It's very exciting, and I couldn't emphasize that point enough, just what you reiterated. Yeah. So yeah. Jessica, you need help. We're here to help you.
That's great. Just in closing, any advice you might give to others who are, it's not a big lift to apply for the SMART grant, but it's a big lift to implement it. Anyone who's feeling a little trepidatious about it, any thoughts that you might have for them?
Reach out. The communities are great, right? Reach out and ask for help. And share. And, we're going to make mistakes. And I have a whole list of mistakes we've already made here, and those things are really good to share. and what not to do and how to do it and what's working and what's not. I think that people are standing by, organizations, nonprofits, federal government, you guys, Bloomberg's been great, to just help get this work done and think into the future. I can't tell you that if you're worried about reaching out, don't be. Everyone's here to help each other, and no one's done it perfectly.
I think it's telling that a mayor would take time out of, your schedule and all that you have to do to come and share that information and sort of pay it forward to the other community. So I know there's a lot of deep appreciation for you being here.
My pleasure.
Michelle, I don't know that I see any questions for the mayor. So maybe give it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Karina. And thank you to all the mayors. Thank you, Mayor Greenberg, as well. So before we end our session today, we want to make sure we get some feedback from you all. You're participating in these polls absolutely helps us to improve, future offerings and the kind of things that you are interested in. And so we'll ask that you take a moment to fill out the poll that has popped up on your screen. We also, as you're filling out the poll, I want to share some information about upcoming opportunities. For cities with a population of 150,000 or less, registration's now open for our SMART Boot Camp. This is a special kind of boot camp where city leaders will be paired with a subject matter expert who will work closely with you on the specific areas of your application that need to be fine-tuned. So you can visit the link in the chat to learn more and check your city's eligibility and register. As Ben said to us earlier, the application window is closing soon. So we want to make sure you get all the support you need to make sure that you're, developing a competitive application. So that's for cities with a population of 150,000 and less. Then I just wanted to, before we wrap up, I want to be sure to encourage you to check out the calendar and resources on the website. We've posted the 5 winning strategies for SMART grant applications in the resources library section of the website. So following this, as you're working on your SMART grant application, that's there as a resource. We've also posted the case stories on winning applications from Fort Collins and Cleveland in the winning application section of the website. So that will be helpful, I think, to review as you're thinking about applying for this. And finally, our next session is on Tuesday, September 26th at 2 p.m. The session will be on Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which was referred to as BEAD, to discuss strategies to expand broadband access in your community. We know how important that is to every community. So I hope you'll visit the link in the chat to register and encourage you to share it with your colleagues who are focused on broadband access. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.